Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Theology Thursday. Little secret, I wasn't here last week. We recorded 2 the week before, and you can probably tell because we had this. Oh, at least I think I had the same shirt on. I went to Hamilton Island and played golf. So hopefully though you enjoyed our latest snippet on 1 John, the first epistle of John. So we're still there, and we're in chapter 2 still. Verse 15, I think, from memory.
We'll read 15 to 17 just to for context.
Oh, but is this one of your translations?
Yeah, it's still the same.
This is
it's
the
still
Doc
the same.
Dave.
Still the same passage. Don't love the world or the things that it offers. If you love the world, you can't also have love for the Father. Everything that the world offers, the craving to satisfy fleshly desires, the chasing after the things that you see and want to have, and the pride that comes with any success in life, none of these things come from the Father. It's all from the world. The world and all of these desires that it creates will eventually disappear, but anyone who obeys God will live forever.
Wow.
So John is writing this letter to the church in Ephesus, as we've said, which is a church to which he feels a sense of real affinity. He's an old man now, and he writes to these people that he cares deeply about. People that he calls my little children or my dear friends. He
must have been a good church. Paul wrote to them with affection as well.
Yeah.
They were obviously a real key people.
I think so. And John really loved them, and he wanted to build them up in their faith and wanted to warn them about some of the false teaching that had begun to circulate around that area as well.
And look, to be, just if you weren't aware of this, a lot of these epistles that John wrote and that Paul touched on as well were dealing with that subject, false teaching, the Gnosticism,
bringing correction.
Yeah,
there was this false teaching, Gnosticism, as you've mentioned, that was circulating that said that matter is inherently evil. So Christ couldn't have had a material body. So that denies the incarnation, the whole idea of the God-man concept. Jesus Christ, they suggest, simply appeared to be man, but that was simply an illusion. But they have to also take this a step further by suggesting that because all matter is evil, the goal of our lives is to escape this material world and move to a new heaven and new earth. And we're looking to escape the world, so it doesn't matter how our physical bodies live now.
Can you see what they did there?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's always the same, isn't it? People looking for an excuse to sin, to whatever, like it's usually sexual, to be honest. The Nicolaitans, that was sexual. There was a lot of different sexual things that people are looking for license to. In fact, I think people still do this to this day, looking for theological, spiritual loopholes to get away with what they want to do. And this one was, the matter doesn't matter. The physical world doesn't matter, so you can do what you want.
Yeah,
Woo-hoo!
That's it. So John tries to teach them. He begins to teach them about love, God's type of love. After all, a genuine believer wants to obey the one whom they declare as their Lord. And the way that love is outworked is by loving God and loving what God loves. So that means loving his people. In other words, love the church, love each other. That's what John is saying. So John tells them they can't love both God and the world. The two ideas, he says, are incompatible. Yeah. And as we noted, John's not just talking about people here. Of course, we are to love people. After all, God so loved the world. He loved people that he gave his son for them, and John was the one that wrote that. So obviously the church needs to continue to love them enough to tell them about that love of God and draw them to trust him. So
in fact, John says not just the world, the whole world.
Yeah.
Because some might say, well, then I'll have to love my brothers and sisters in the church, but I don't have to like those pagans out there.
That's not what John's saying.
No.
And so what John's talking about here is the world system, the sum total of human culture that is separated from, that's alienated from, that's hostile to God and has Satan as its head or ruler. He refers to one as darkness and the other as light. And he urges the church to walk in light.
So we've got these two different value systems.
Absolutely.
And they are opposed to each other. Make no mistake
Yeah,
about it. They don't coexist.
Yeah, for John, it's a sharp dichotomy between the two: light and darkness, truth and falsehood, love and hate, love of the Father, love of the world. He has all these in contrast. He says that you can't profess to be a Christian if you are so committed to the world and its system that you fail to live by the standards that God has established. Right. This is something that is black and white. It's light and dark. That's what he's saying. And a thing that I've often said, you've got black and you've got white. You've got the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. There's no kingdom of grey.
No.
There's no middle ground.
No
it's one or the other. And that's what John is talking about here.
I think, in a practical sense, it's self versus others. It's looking after number one first. That's me. I'm first. I'm me over everybody. Or as Jesus said, no, you got to put others first. Or the writer to Hebrews said, putting others first. Let us consider how we may, consider Jesus who put others first. And it's completely the opposite to the world's values.
It's interesting that John starts this letter by extolling the virtues of agape, of love, God's type of love, telling us that love is a mark or evidence of those who truly are following Jesus. But now he's saying something a little unusual. He's saying, don't love. He mentions love more than 50 times in this letter, but this is the only time that he tells us not to love. And I think it's worth noting here that despite what some people suggest, sometimes Christianity is not just a list of do's and don'ts. It's often noted that true Christianity is not a religion.
It's a relationship.
Absolutely. Right. In fact, the ultimate personal relationship is that relationship with the living God. Yeah. And that's substantially true.
But sometimes we can, by insisting on, we're not a bunch of rules and regulations, which I've said many times, and I'm sure you have too. Yep. You can actually lose something in there too. Hang on a minute. There are some, there's some wisdom here and some guidance, right? There are some rules.
In relationships, there are some times where you want to express a warning, a caution, or maybe even a directive, a command not to do something. Why would God do that?
Because he loves us.
It's simple.
Yeah.
It's really, God knows what's best and he loves us.
Every parent knows that.
I've often told the story, when our family moved to Bendigo in Victoria, the manse where we moved into had this large planter box on the front veranda. It was full of cacti. And we showed it to our children and warned them,
do not
touch them. Do not touch that box. We gave them a commandment.
Yes.
Why? Because we knew it was best for them not to touch, and we loved them and didn't want to see them hurt.
Right.
But one day my son was playing on the veranda with his favourite ball, and the ball landed in the middle of the planter box.
So just in case you missed it, full of cactus.
Full of cacti.
Right.
And my son, who was about 4 at the time, he wanted to have the ball more than he wanted to obey his parents. So he simply grabbed a cactus and pulled it out of the way in order to get the ball.
Ouch.
Many hours of pain later, he began to realise that some commandments are for our own good.
Yeah.
And God knows. He loves us, so he warns us. He commands us to do certain things and not to do certain things.
That actually reminds me of a story. In Queensland, if you're not from here, there's a tree called the stinging tree. And up in Cairns in particular, they're quite prolific. And they've got a big heart-shaped leaf, and they're kind of furry. And it says everywhere, beware of the stinging tree. Don't go in here. Do not go this way. Anyway, I was with Kaz one day and I saw this and I knew what it looked like because I'd been stung by one once before accidentally. And I looked at this tree and I think, it seems like it's down in northern New South Wales. I didn't think they came down this far. Surely that can't be a stinging tree. And so I said, there's only one way to find out.
Oh, no.
And I thought, what's the most innocuous place on my body? So I chose just the smooth side of my knuckle, and I just touched the leaf like that, and instantly regretted it. It was like, yeah, it's on fire. And then you can't see, there's just tiny little needles pulling them all out. It's the same thing, right? God says, don't, just trust me, would you? Don't do this.
He had tiny little needles, like his hand was just black.
Poor little kid.
You know, that took us. We had actually took him to hospital, and they'd spent quite a long time and still couldn't get them all out. But anyway, here John is delivering one of those commands. He says, "Do not love the world," and there are two main reasons for his command. First, loving the world and loving the Father are incompatible, and second, eternal things are more important than the things that have a finite life and value. And of course, we have to understand what John means by love when he tells us not to love the world. He's talking about an affection for something because of its earthly value. He's talking about something for which an appetite, a desire, something that you take pleasure in, something that becomes your focus. What you are emotionally, physically, spiritually invested in.
Right.
The source of your comfort, your hope, your security.
I guess what jumps to mind, Dave, like number one, I would have thought in most cultures would be money, right? So is there anything wrong with money?
In itself, no.
No, right? But doesn't the Bible say it's not money? A lot of people misquote that. They say money's the root of all evil. But that's not what it says. No. It says the love of money is the root of much evil. You need money to survive. You need money to pay the rent and put fuel in your car and put food on your table. But loving it, once your heart becomes invested in it, didn't Jesus say that you cannot love both God and mammon, or money, right? What's another one? What about fame? Like celebrity. I always say, humans are not built for praise. There's only one being in the entire universe that is built for glory. When I say praise, I mean glory, right? And when you give anybody too much glory, too much celebrity, they are going to break. They're not built for it. It's a very rare person that doesn't love it. You do find the odd person, you hear the odd story where, Keanu Reeves still travels on the subway and is very generous, and he hasn't let it go to his head. Please, Keanu, if you're listening, don't let it go to your head, because you'll just wreck my story. But, most people, even in the church, you see these pastors that get too much celebrity, goes to the head.
One that goes closely tied to that is power.
Oh, yes.
People want power.
Right.
And they love to have power over others.
Right. It makes them... it's not that... Is there anything wrong with power? There's nothing wrong with power. There's nothing wrong with having somebody who's the leader but it's loving it.
Yep.
It's when you have an insatiable appetite for it that you start to love that stuff. And that's what John's saying, isn't it? Do not love these things. Do not love them. They will get your heart, and they will not last. They won't last. Only the eternal last.
So John's not so much talking about things in and of themselves. He's talking about attitude.
Right.
So it's our attitude, and that's what we've been saying. In other words, what rules your life?
Right.
What drives you from the deepest part of your heart? What drives us in what direction? Where are you heading? You see, you have been joined to Christ. You are in a relationship with him. You might remember the story of the prophet Hosea. God's people, Israel, they'd forsaken him. They'd chased after other nations, and they've adopted all sorts of false gods. They've cheated on God.
Yeah, to God, that's any idolatry, or that is like adultery.
Yeah,
spiritual adultery.
So God demonstrates how he sees it, how he feels about what's happened. And he does that through Hosea. He gets Hosea to fall in love and eventually to marry a prostitute named Gomer. Hosea loves her and provides for her, but she still runs away after other loves. Hosea then goes at great cost to himself and he pays her off. He pays off her debt to the pimp to whom she's indebted herself. And God uses this as a picture of his heart and love for his people. Even though they've turned their hearts to love other things, God was still willing to pursue an unfaithful people and rescue them, to save them.
Yeah, such is his love.
Yeah, absolutely.
He still does that today.
Yeah.
He chases after even unfaithful people, all of us. We're all that way. We don't deserve it. When we do reject God, we reject his wisdom, we reject his guidance, we reject his love, we want to do it our own way. How is it that God still chases after us? Still goes and that's what Hosea is illustrating. God saying, come on, this is what I'm like with you. Just come back to me.
Yeah. So some things last longer than others. When we're thinking about investing in something, we invest in things that we think will have a future, things that will stand the test of time. We probably think of things like real estate or precious metals and so on. Some things just aren't worth investing in because they have no future. CDs. Remember, we used to CDs and cassettes.
Blockbuster video.
Yeah.
Remember?
So there's no future in these things because they're passing away. They're dying out. And John points out that there are some things that will outlast the longest lasting things in the world. God will outlast the world. So living for him rather than the world is the best possible investment that we can make. The future of the world is judgment and death. But the future for those who are with God is joy and life.
Right.
And that's why Jesus said, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth. Rather, store up treasure in heaven, because those treasures will never be corrupted by inflation, nor diminished by rust, or eaten by moths, and are even safely protected from the thieves.
Right.
It's these eternal things that are those which we should value more than anything else.
Right.
And John reminds the church who they are. Then he reminds them how to live. His point is that those who know God, who love God, are going to love him and not the world. It's the
ultimate in, like, we all understand short-term pain for long-term gain, right? We're gonna tighten our belts now because then in the long run we're gonna do well. I'm gonna save now and I'm not gonna spend it all now so that when I'm older I will enjoy it, or I'm going to eat healthy now so that when I'm older or whatever. This is the ultimate, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, a bit of short-term restriction on ourselves, a bit of short-term. Don't love that stuff. Just reject all of that. Don't love the things the world gives, because the long term, the trillions and trillions of years in heaven will be worth it.
He's sort of drawing a contrast here between true believers and false teachers.
Right.
True believers love God, not the world, because they know that God will outlast the world. And this is why John is saying we can't love both the world and God at the same time. Notice John doesn't say don't believe the world, or don't think like the world, or don't even do what the world does. He says don't love the world.
Why do you suppose that is?
Well, people struggle with thinking and believing and doing, but when we love them and the things they're doing, that's what becomes important. Why? Because our behaviour, our thoughts, our beliefs are all downstream from our love. What we do and think believes from what we really love. Love is ultimately the focus of our will. What our will is going to drive us to do is devoted to those things that we love.
Right.
The question that John has for us is about what we love. Do we love what the world loves, or do we love what God loves?
Because if we get that right, then our behaviour and our thoughts and our actions will all follow.
And that's why loving the world and loving the Father are incompatible.
Right.
That's why Christians can't have two loves. That's why Jesus taught in Matthew's Gospel, as you mentioned before, that we can't have the two masters. We'll love one and hate the other, or we'll be devoted to one and despise the other. And that's why John could say here, even if we're engrossed in the outlook and personal perspective of a world that rejected Jesus, then it's evident that we don't love the Father. Right. Following Jesus is about picking sides. We've got to decide whose values are we going to love? Whose values are we going to follow? Jesus or the world?
You think about it.
That's what he's on about.
If your primary love is God, you love the Father. John says, we read it, we've done it over the last few weeks. John says, if you love God, then you will love people. In fact, if you don't love people, that's evidence. That's an indication you don't really love the Father. Yep. So there's a lot of people, I think, that would say they love God, but actually they're kidding themselves because they don't love people. He's not affected them. Now, here's the caveat on that. If you're a new Christian, it does take a little time for him to start to change you. You know, give him a year or two, and you know you'll find that some people it's much faster.
Well, it takes a lifetime in a sense, because our whole life is continually growing and developing from, as Paul puts it, from glory to glory. Mm. We're progressing bit by bit. So if you're not at the top rung of the ladder yet, that doesn't mean that you're not on the ladder. You've just got a few steps to go yet.
I've seen a few just heart-moving stories on the internet where you see these incredibly mature Christians who obviously have their hearts shaped by the Father, and something tragic has happened to them. Somebody has really hurt them. I'm thinking of one young guy, and his brother was shot by a police officer, and in court he's saying to this police officer, "I love you and I forgive you." And I'm sure that he had to wrestle with that at first, like, I'm so angry with that person. But eventually his love for the Father manifested in love for this person. There's another story I thought of where, again, I saw it on the internet. This mother's child, her son, got caught up in a gang, and he was murdered by this youth. And they caught the guy who murdered him. He went to jail. She started visiting. The mother of the murdered son started visiting him in jail. And when he had served his sentence, she adopted him into her family and looked after him. And thus, this love of the Father was manifesting. No, it didn't happen immediately. It wasn't like the same day that her son was murdered, but it manifested. It grew in her until she could say, "I do love you," and that's like Dave said. It can be a bit of a ladder. You might not be quite there just yet. Maybe you are struggling with somebody who's hurt you, but if you focus on the Father, if your heart is to Him, if you love the Father, He'll help you. It will start to manifest. He will show you. He will start to get you to a place where you're not filled with bitterness anymore.
Why? Because He doesn't want that ill feeling, that hatred, and all of that sort of stuff to kill you.
Right.
Because your attitude is not going to affect somebody else.
Absolutely.
It's going to affect you.
Right. So there you have it. Love the Father, don't love the world. Like God saying, just trust me. Just trust me on this. Don't love the world. That's what we learned today. So God bless you and have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Thursday on Theology Thursday.